I'm Ben, and you found Theology Over Easy. Here's something I get asked from time to time. You've decided to become a Christian or go deeper in your faith, but your family and friends are all too happy to point out the reasons why there is no God. Now, one of those arguments is probably going to be along the line of, if a good and powerful God exists, then that God would not allow evil and suffering to exist. Evil and suffering do exist, therefore there is no God. Now, that sounds reasonable, and it resonates with how we feel when we're faced with evil and suffering. But there is no difference between that line of reasoning and me saying, if a good and powerful God exists, then that God would create love and beauty. There is love and beauty in the world, therefore God exists. As arguments go, it's not a very good or reasonable one. Furthermore, if there is a good and powerful God to blame for evil and suffering, there is a good and powerful God who may have very good reasons for allowing them to exist that you and I cannot know because we are creatures and not God. At a deeper level, though, I think it's actually more difficult to explain the presence of evil and suffering if there is no God. Here's the thing. The whole line of reasoning here is based on a premise that humans ought not to suffer. But on what does an atheist base that premise? If there is no God, then the world just is. I mean, the evolutionary process of natural selection even depends on the death and destruction of the strong over the weak. On what basis, then, does the atheist claim that the natural world is horribly wrong, unfair, and unjust? The philosopher Alvin Plantinga put it this way: could there really be any such thing as horrifying wickedness if there were no God and we just evolved? I don't see how. There can be such a thing only if there is a way that rational creatures are supposed to live, obliged to live. A secular way of looking at the world has no place for genuine moral obligation of any sort, and thus no way to say there is such a thing as genuine and appalling wickedness. Accordingly, if you think there really is such a thing as horrifying wickedness and not just an illusion of some sort, then you have a powerful argument for the reality of God. But let's acknowledge something. A library could be built to house nothing but the books and writings of great minds on this subject, yet the question persists. That's because when we are face to face with suffering, no explanation is satisfactory. Like hitting a thumb with a hammer, all we can think about is our pain and grief. And in those moments, all of us will find ourselves asking, why, God? And you're not off the hook, God. In the end, the Christian response is basically this: God came to earth in the person of Jesus Christ to put himself on the hook of human suffering. And in his resurrection, God made clear that evil and suffering do not and have not the final say. I'll see you next week on Theology Over Easy.